Hello, how are you today? Things are good here. It's another beautiful day in Bakersfield, California. The high today is like in the 80s, low in the 50s Fahrenheit. Really pretty nice. The flowers are gorgeous. I love springtime except for allergies. It does set off my allergies. So today we're going to move forward past the sloper and we're going to start talking about full fashion versus blended shaping. I'm going to show you some different ways of doing waist shaping. I have quite a few samples of sweaters to show you with different ways of doing waist shaping. And we're going to talk a little bit more about knitter's graph paper and graphing the shaped areas of your garment. Next week, I'll talk about pockets. Okay, and I am going to give you the directions for doing my pocket that I have on all of the other sweaters. This time it'll be from bottom up. So let's see who's here. So Linda Annabelle from British Columbia, 37 Vega Lira from California, Elaine Lee from Lutherville, Maryland, Mary Inman from Atlanta, Marie Tobita from New York City, Elizabeth Nilsson from Sweden, Marie Malerich, she doesn't say where she's from, Francoise from France, Monique van Heemstra from the Netherlands, Fatima from Portugal, Chris Hoffman from Indianapolis, Lizanne from Benicia, California, Carolyn Finnerman from the Central Oregon, Eamon Carnes from Washington State, Deb Rohrbach from Ohio, and quite a few more people. I'm not sure how many are on all together. I don't really get to see those numbers until it's over. So anyway, let's start out. I'm just going to show you some sweaters with different waist shaping, including no waist shaping, and just see what the difference is. So I have my model here. I'm going to use this one. Push my chair up. And this is a sweater. This is with no waist shaping. So you can see the sides come down straight here. No waist shaping, which is fine. You do not have to have waist shaping. But it does add. So this is no waist shaping, straight down the sides, okay? The next garment, and that was knitted in the round top down, and it's called, maybe somebody can fill in the answer for what it's called for me. This is one that I did, Amy Herzog sweater. Remember when she had hers that you could fill in your details, your fabric, and your dimensions, and then she would spit out a pattern for you, and you'd knit it up. In this one, the waist shape, and this is seamed at the sides. This is seamed with set-in sleeves, worked from the bottom up. This is the stitch pattern's called Mermaid Mesh, which I really like. This one has waist shaping. You can see it. So you can see that it comes in like this here. But I'm not crazy about it. This is an all-over stitch pattern, so you really can't do the waist shaping in here or in the back here, without really severely disrupting the stitch pattern. And sometimes that might be okay. My model's going to fall down on me. Okay. But you may not want to interrupt the stitch pattern. If it's a cable or something where there's divisions between it, you can do the increases and decreases between the cables. But this is an all-over stitch pattern, so you can't really do that. What I don't like about this one, I'll show you up close under the microscope in a few minutes. But the waist shaping was worked at the sides. This one is top down in the round. And it's more of, it just has lower shaping. It does not have upper shaping. So there's no decreases. This is by Vera Sannon. I love her. Just a little sleeve cap top. It doesn't have any decreases coming in here, but then it has increases, and the increases are these lace inset panels. And And I'll show this under the microscope too. So it's kind of like almost princess shaping. It starts up here, whereas my waist is down here. It's the lace panels start up here and get wider as it goes down. Let me see if I can raise her up a little bit. Well, I don't want to mess with it. It'll fall down. Okay, so that is lower, where you would, if you were knitting this from the bottom up, you would do the decreases, but then you wouldn't do any increases. So if you have wider hips, this is a really good way to work the waist shaping. This is another one by Vera. This one doesn't have any waist shaping at all, and it has some added fabric in the middle of the front. It's got these gathers right here. So it's pretty full down here. So this is a good one for someone who also is larger down here or larger hips. It's very attractive. I like it. I love it. It's one of my favorite sweaters. I wear this one a lot. The previous one these are both knit in fingering weight yarn. This one is entrelac, and the way the shaping works on this is by changing the stitch count in the entrelac squares. So the squares down at the bottom are bigger, and as they go up, they get smaller and smaller. Same on the sleeves. They start out really small down here, and then they get bigger as they come up towards the body. This is also set-in sleeves, knit from the bottom up and seamed. So that's a way of doing shaping by changing your stitch count if you have a stitch pattern like that. And last, this is the cardigan for the It Takes a Guild, which is the first of my tutorials. But what this one has, and this has the pockets. When you have pockets and you want to have waist shaping, you're still going to do the waist shaping, but it will be underneath the pocket. So the waist shaping on this one goes from here to the top of the pocket, and then the pocket is covering over the body of the fabric, but underneath the waist shaping still is continuing under the pocket. So the pocket does not have waist shaping in the front fabric, but in the lining fabric there is waist shaping. So let's look at some of these under the microscope, okay? So to say. So let's look at the one I told you that I don't like. Let's go down here. I'm going to switch to my hands. Okay, so let's make it smaller. This one is the Mermaid's Mesh stitch pattern. And on the sides where the shaping is, and this is seamed, this is set in sleeves seamed. Do you see the waist shaping? It's very severe here. Do you see this? And I don't like that because it pooches out at the side. And even when I'm wearing this, it pooches out. So I kind of, I'm not happy that I did that. But this has something else I want to point out, and that is when you're working anything that has eyelets in it, like this, when you get over to the edge of your fabric, you need to have, at least I have one column of stockinette, and then the other column of stockinette is the selvage stitch. So when you're working a lace pattern like this, when you get over close to the edge, you don't want to have eyelets right next to your selvage stitch, because if you try to seam that, it's just not going to look good. This is up here where there's no shaping, and you can see I have two columns of stockinette stitch, and then on the inside are the two columns of these selvage stitches. So the lace doesn't go right up to the seam. It's one stitch away from the seam on either side. Same way when you're doing the underarms. This is a set-in sleeve. So you can see I maintained that stockinette stitch, and this is all twisted stitches. This is a twisted stitch design with the eyelets in it. But I maintained those two columns, one on each side. This is on the body, this is on the sleeve side of stockinette, and in this case it's a twisted stitch to go with the pattern, so that you don't have eyelets coming right up. Same thing on the neck. When I was working the neck, you want to keep one stitch away. Even here, there's one stitch here. There's a row of stitches above the last row of eyelets. There's another row of stitches, and then another row where I bound off, and that's where I picked up the stitches. Otherwise, you would be picking up in the eyelets themselves, and that would not look very good. So let's see, I want to show you this other one. This one with the lace inset panels, and this is an idea that you can do on your garment. So you can see, here's the underarm, and then just start with the lace panel, and that gives you your waist shaping. Isn't that cool? That's something you can do. So, and another thing, the last thing, and I don't have a sweater, but the sweater I'm knitting for myself, I'm going to employ this technique, is down here, I used a US 4 needle. This is a Wollmeise lace garn. And when I got up to the marker, so this is my actual gauge swatch for my sweater, okay? When I got up to the marker, I went down to a 3, and I haven't worked very much, but you can see that it is pulling in a little bit. Can you see that from here to here? It's pulling in a little bit. So I'm going to use this method for waist shaping. I'm going to go down in needle size through the waist area and then go back up into the main body needle for the body of my sweater. Any questions about that? Let's see. Let me see if there's any questions. If you have a question, put word question in all caps. Let's see. So nice to see everybody. Belinda, question. What is the wool you're using for the Vera jumpers? This one, this is a fingering weight wool, and I don't remember. You can look on my Ravelry page. I have all of these documented, and it tells the wool, but it's fingering weight. I think this one's like an MCN, so it's merino, cashmere, and nylon. And this one is just 100% merino. It's also fingering weight. I love knitting sweaters, pullovers like this with fingering weight. They're just so drapey. They're not heavy. I use a 4 or 5 needle. So it's not bad. Even though you'd think fingering weight takes for a long time, it goes pretty fast. Not bad at all. And let's see, any more questions? Delise, okay. Joan Miller, what's the name of the gold sweater? Let me look it up. Let me go to Ravelry. I should have done my homework, huh? Let's see. Ravelry, my projects. I'm sorry. Let's see. The gold one is called Imagina, I-M-A-G-N-A, and the yarn that I used for that was Chameleon Sock by Indigo Dragonfly. The blue one is also by Vera, and that one is called Natsu, N-A-T-S-U, Summer 2000. It was a knit along, so it's called Natsu Summer Pullover. And the yarn that I used for that was Periwinkle Sheep Watercolors 2 Sock. So you can look at those on Ravelry if you want and get more information about them. Any other question from SJM Clardy? Does changing needle size work if you're knitting in all stockinette, or is it too obvious? It is not obvious. It works really good. And of course, I would swatch it first because you don't want to find out on your sweater that you don't like it. Diane Joel, do you have an example where you did waist shaping in the front or back of the sweater? Yes, the last one that I showed, this one, has waist shaping in the front and the back. Let me put it back on the model again. I didn't show you the back. That's my preferred method. I really like doing waist shaping in the front and the back rather than the sides. Here's the shaping right here on one side, and here's the shaping on the other side. And I'm going to show you, let me show this up to you up close with my hands so you can see what this looks like. Okay, let's go to the second camera. Okay, so here's the waist. Right here is the waist. This is above the waist, and this is below the waist. So you can see the shaping here. Now this was knit top down, so up here I used blended shaping, which I'm going to show you up close examples in a second, and then I used make ones to make my increases here. It really doesn't stand out much at all. I'm sorry about the sore on my thumb. I've been gardening. I got my vegetable garden going and I wore a hole in my thumb with my shovel. I had a big blister, so it's healing, but I'm sure you've noticed it on the screen. But okay, so let's talk about, we're going to talk now about, these are, I just blocked them. Take them off the blocking board. We're going to talk about the difference between full fashioned and blended decreases for waist shaping and the effect that it gives you and why you would use one over the other. Okay, I saved these little styrofoam things that come in packaging. They're great for blocking swatches. So here we have two swatches. This one, let's look at this one first. Let's pretend like this is the back of the garment. So this is the waist over here. This is the side. This is the middle of the back or the middle of the front. Okay? Front or back. This one has, I want to get it really focused for you. It started out with 20 stitches. And I put a marker. The marker on this one would be right here. So then on a right side row, I worked over until there were 2 stitches before the marker, and then I worked a knit 2 together. And then I did this every 4 rows. So up here, worked over till there were 2 stitches before the marker, I worked a knit 2 together. All the way up here till I made 5 decreases. So if you think of this as the middle of the front of your garment or the middle of the back, you can see how it pulls this fabric over. And it appears that this fabric is coming actually on top. Doesn't it look visually like this is going under this? So where the knit 2 togethers are, it does literally pull it under. So each knit 2 together, here's the row below, here's where we created, this is the stitch that was the result of the knit 2 together, but here's the 2 stitches that are pulled together when you create the knit 2 together. And the one on the left comes over on top of the one on the right, and they lean to the right. Knit 2 together leans to the right. So it visually makes this fabric look like it's coming up under here. This is called a blended decrease, blended shaping. And next week when we talk about the pockets, we'll also talk about blended and full fashion increases for above the waist shaping. This is the other swatch, exactly the same starting point. I put my marker right here. This is where the marker was. I worked over until 2 stitches before the marker, and I did an SSK. SSK, 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 SSK. So let's compare these two. They have the same number of stitches. This one comes over, and here this line is actually created by the knit 2 together. Because remember when I told you the knit 2 together, the left stitch comes on top of the right stitch. So this is actually the column with the knit 2 togethers in it. This is the column, same column, but this column has SSKs in it. And it still pulls the fabric over. If this were the center of the front or the center of the back, this is still pulling the fabric over this way and creating your lower waist shaping. But what happens is it looks like this fabric is actually going on top of this fabric. Can you see that? They look very different. Of course, if you've never looked at them up close before, you may not have noticed these differences. This is called full fashioned. And the reason it's called full, and there's 8 stitches here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Here there's 8 stitches before the knit 2 together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and the knit 2 together column. So you can see because of that knit 2 together goes over to the right, it actually makes this part of the fabric look smaller. See how this looks bigger? This looks smaller. It's a visual thing. They're both exactly the same. It's just a visual difference. So when would you use this versus this? Usually I use this method because I think it's less visible. I think these stand out. You can see them. But so if I'm doing stockinette and there's no stitch pattern or anything, I might choose this because it is hard to notice in the garment when you're done. On this one, if you were doing a stitch pattern like stranded knitting or a mosaic knitting or something where it's got a definite stitch pattern color work, you would not want a line like this coming up, a line that would oppose your stitch pattern. This would actually create a line on top of your stitch pattern. This, your stitch pattern would just come up and end. So if you're worried about which one you should use on your garment, guess what you should do? Swatch it. I actually really enjoy swatching because I learn so much about my knitting before I start the project. It's amazing. And it becomes quite addicting too. So I challenge you to try the different elements. And when we get to the part where we're going to do buttonholes and the button bands, guess what you're going to do? You're going to swatch it before you do it on your garment. Just going straight to your garment's kind of scary to me because who knows how that's going to turn out. So do you have any questions about this part? Nick, comment, this sweater analysis is very helpful. Thank you. Thank you. I have more sweaters, but as I've told you before, my house is in disarray. So I just tried to pull out some with different elements. Veronica, question, will the difference between the needle size change how the rows meet up at the seam? Well, that's a great, great question. I would suggest using the needle size change on the front and the back exactly the same. So when you get up to row number, 32 or whatever on the front and the back, that's where you're going to go down a needle size for your waist shaping. And then when you go back up to your main, above the waist shaping, you're going to go to the main needle on the same row. I literally count when I'm knitting something in pieces and they're going to be seamed together. I do count rows. I measure, but I also count rows. And I put a little stitch marker. Like I might knit 10 rows and then I put a stitch marker, a removable stitch marker over a stitch every 10 rows. And then it's really easy for me to count. I go 10, 20, 30, 40, like that. I use these things a lot. I buy them in mass, and I use them. In fact, this is a small container. One time I bought 5,000 of them, and I gave them to all my friends, and I use them for my classes. Nancy Porter. So you have 2 stitches at the side seam with lace. One is in the seam and one shows on the public side. Exactly, that is correct. Because if you, and this is another thing that you can swatch, if you have a lace, an eyelet in your lace, and it turns out in the stitch pattern that it lands right next to the selvage stitch, when you go to seam, you're going to be seaming into that eyelet. And what is it going to do? It's going to make it bigger. You'll have a big hole there. And later on, you'll go back and you'll go, why did I do that? That was stupid. But when you're doing it, you don't see it. So I've learned that from my own mistakes. I do not work, when I'm working lace in rows, I stop the row before the last row and then bind off. If I'm working stitches, I work over till there's 2 stockinette stitches on the edge. One is for the selvage stitch and one is just to give you a nice even edge to seam against. So you can seam between the 2 stockinette stitches. You can seam between the selvage stitch and that column of stockinette stitch that'll be on the right side of the fabric. These are the things that make a big difference in what your garment looks like. Oh, Jerry Rossiter says, comment 15 minutes and 135 watching. Thank you. Sue McFicker says she likes my current swatch. I do too. And you know what I'm going to do? Let me go back to my hands. And then I have some more shaping I want to show you. I have some more swatches out here. What I'm going to do with this, and I'm not sure yet. I have my little swatch. Maybe I'll try to work on it before next week. I have, this is the first swatch, okay? So first of all, so I have my 2 swatches. This one's just like, like 4x4, but it's not a gauge swatch. It's actually 2 multiples of the stitch pattern, say from here to here and here to here, and then 2 multiples high, 2 repeats high. I just wanted to see if I liked knitting it. Because you know what? Sometimes I try a stitch pattern and I don't like knitting it. It's not fun to knit. In that case, I abandon it because I don't want to spend a whole sweater amount of time knitting a stitch pattern I don't like. This was actually the second stitch pattern that I tried. The first one I abandoned because I didn't enjoy knitting it. So I just knit a little swatch to see, can I tolerate this stitch pattern? Yes, I like this one. So then I'm knitting my big gauge swatch. And as I showed you before, see my ribbing down here? So I took elements out of this and brought it down and created ribbing. So that's a test. My ribbing on my sweater will be longer, but I just want to see if it worked. It does. It looks good. And so I'll use this on the wrists of my sweater, around the neck, and around the bottom of the sweater. And then I've got my stitch pattern going, and up here is where I switched needle size. So I've got to knit a few more inches with the needle size, and then I'll go back to this size. So my swatch right now, this swatch is 6 inches long. It might be, 10 or 12. It's probably going to be 12 inches long by the time I'm done swatching. And you can see that does take yarn. And as I've told you before, I usually buy an extra skein of whatever yarn I'm going to use for my project just for swatching. And I keep my swatches. I don't rip them out. Of course, if I ran out of yarn, I could rip this out and recondition it. Okay. The mannequin, Can asks, is it an adjustable? Yes. And Demetria is the one that recommended it. Maybe she can say the name of it on here, post it for you. Oh, Mary Wells says she started a sweater and stockinette in the round, and she realized when she had to change needle size, she only changed one of the needles. I've done that too. I've done that. Okay. I would just, she says, should she change? I would just switch to the correct needle size at that point. I wouldn't worry about it. You're not going to be able to tell the difference. Okay. Question. If changing needle size, this would change the gauge too. Yes? How do we adjust for this on our knitter's graph paper? I wouldn't worry about that on the knitter's graph paper because you're just going to do it for a few inches. For the waist shaping, it's going to bring the sides in. And because you went down a needle size, yes, it's going to bring the length in, but not very much. Maybe half an inch or less. Not noticeable. But that's a great, great question. And I'm going to show you some knitter's graph paper. Okay. Okay, so a couple people commented about the ribbing. I love to create my own ribbing. I always make a ribbing that goes with the project. The rule of thumb for ribbing is that it should have approximately the same number of knits as purls. Obviously, this has more knits than purls, but it's got enough purls in here. You see these all that look like knits are on this side are on purls. So you want to have approximately, it doesn't have to be exactly equal, the same number of knits and purls to create ribbing, whatever the stitch pattern is, because then it won't roll. Because you're mixing up the knits and purls, it prevents it from rolling. Okay, so I have a couple more swatches I want to show you. This is kind of jumping ahead, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about the full fashion versus blended. So these are around the neck, or this could be an armhole if you were doing a vest. Which one would this be called? What would you call this one? Somebody want to guess? Well, the dress form is Dritz on Amazon. And this one, the one that I got, is the small size, and it goes up the largest. The small goes up to like a small to medium, and which is my size. And it fits me pretty well. It was around, $99. I like it a lot. So what would you call this? You've had a chance to answer now. Is this full fashion or blended? Blended, Mountain Mom. Deborah. Yes, it's blended. And so it creates that little line. And there's a whole nother row of stitches on the other side of that, which is the selvage. Here's the selvage stitch. See, it goes to the wrong side when you pick up the stitches. So this is called blended. What's this one called? This one's full fashioned. So the difference is this one, the decrease leans away from the edge, leans away. So in this case, this is an SSK, but it's leaning away from the edge. This one is a knit two together, leans towards the edge, so you don't get a line there. Now, this line actually looks nice in many cases. But again, if you were doing stranded knitting or something that has a stitch pattern that would be interrupted by this, and you don't want a line across the front of your stitch pattern, then you would have, this is called full fashioned. And full fashion means that the stitch pattern goes all the way to the edge. And it still has that selvage stitch on this side. There's the selvage stitch. So this would be worked one stitch before the edge. You never do these on the edge. I should have mentioned that too. When you do shaping on the edge of your fabric and there's going to be some seaming or stitches picked up, you do not do it in the edge stitch. In fact, when I teach my knitting classes, I tell people just don't make increases or decreases on the edge stitch. It's just not a good idea. It doesn't look good. It makes for an uneven edge. And if you did it on the edge where you're going to pick up stitches or seam, it makes it very difficult to make a tidy pickup or a tidy seam. So whenever you're doing these on the edge of the fabric, and if you were doing, where's my green sweater? And I did point that out on here, on the green sweater, where this shaping is here, that I did not do it on the edge stitch. It's done one stitch in. It's not in the selvage stitch. You don't do shaping in the selvage stitch. Okay, any questions about this? Margaret, yes, the full fashion does seem less obvious, and these are actually my level 2, Master Hand Knitter level 2 neck samples. This is the one that they require. I gave this one as an additional to show the opposite, because they really don't tell you which way to do it. You can choose. So I did one of each. Yes, I agree. But this looks nice. Let's see. So on here, on the front of this sweater, here's the neck. That line going around here just makes a nice edge to pick up from. It just looks good. It looks tidy. Here's the other side. I use this a lot around the neck. Actually, on this one, I combined some. Look at this. So I have it going here, and then here I did an SSK because this line needed to come over. I did the same thing up here for these lines. I wanted them to come to the edge. So this one's kind of, I used my eye to see, because down here, these lines are going in the same direction as these lines. So that looks good. Then up here where this line's coming over, I brought it all the way in. So this is all knit 2 togethers. This is an SSK. And then up here, I have an SSK, an SSK, SSK, SSK. Very cool, huh? Just a second, I've got to answer my door. Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, this is some of the things that you learn when you're swatching. You learn, how do you want it to be? What looks good for you. Another thing I wanted to point out, and let me go back to the mannequin to use this opportunity. Some of these sweaters have back neck shaping and some of them don't. This one has back neck shaping. Get it up closer. This one has back neck shaping. It comes down a little bit. Here's the shoulder seam, and here's the shoulder seam right here. Has just a little bit, like a couple of rows of back neck shaping. This one has 0 back neck shaping. Just straight across. You can see it's straight across. But it's got a wider neck too. This is a much wider neck. It's not up close around. So it's coming up, comes right up here. Let's look at the green one, see how high it comes up. This one, there's the side seam. There's the back. I think the other one was up more like this. So this has a little bit of back neck shaping. And this one has back neck shaping a little bit. So you can see it comes down a little bit in the back. This is one of my favorite sweaters. That looks pretty good. Vera is a genius in writing her patterns. This one also has a little bit of back. It's like two rows, not very much. But you can see here, you know, knitting is so flexible. A knit fabric, yeah, you can see it comes down a little bit here. Okay. We'll let her stay dressed. Okay. Any questions about any of that? KN says yes, both of them. No, neither one of these had short. These are knit top down, and Vera has a very interesting shoulder construction. So it's actually in part of the shoulder construction that she creates that. Okay. Margaret Snook, why did you choose not to do back neck shaping on the raglan? I don't know. For me, back neck shaping isn't a critical thing for me. So sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. I can't tell you. Just it was in the moment. Let's see. Any other questions? The stitch pattern for the one that I'm doing is in this book. It's not in the Stitch Bible. It's in the Japanese Knitting Stitches, both by Hitomi Shida, same author. And it's on page 110 is my stitch pattern right there. That's kind of an ugly green. Sometimes you got to get over the color of the picture. And I think sometimes putting them in color is detrimental because if you don't like that color, you're not going to look at the picture. Okay, any other questions? Chris Hoffman, question. So when you're using a purchase pattern, are these things that you determine you want to add? Yes. Yep. I do a lot of my own stuff. I use the overall pattern, but I will do a lot of my things. And a lot of times I knit my own patterns. I don't call them patterns because I don't write them down. I knit my own garments. But if I see something, it's an interesting construction that I want to learn. Usually the only reason at this point in my life that I knit someone else's pattern, if there's something about it that I want to learn. Like you notice a lot of these sweaters, they're different shapes, different little things about them. And that's why I will choose to knit someone else's pattern. Vera I knit because I just really like Vera, and not as I like her as a person. She's a wonderful person, but I love her patterns. They fit really nice. The shoulders are really, really good. She's one that I've really learned a lot about shoulders. Was from Vera. She says if you get the shoulders to fit, everything else will fall from it and look really good. If the shoulders are too wide, too big, they droop off the edges, the whole sweater looks droopy. If you want a droopy looking sweater and that's the fashion statement you're trying to make, that's fine. But if you want something that's not looking droopy, having droopy shoulders makes the whole garment look droopy. So I want to go over a little bit more about the knitter's scrap paper that was in this section of the knit along. So I'm going to go back to my hands again. So here we have what I used in this section. So this is my schematic right here. Where's my schematic? Here's my schematic. This is my schematic. And I took the information from right here, and each one of these squares represents an inch, or 2.5 centimeters. And I put it, this is just regular 1/4 scale graph paper. Each square is 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch and represents 1 inch square. And this is knitter's graph paper. So here you can see that the squares they're square, right? Here they're not, they're rectangular. But you can also see these bigger squares, the darker outlines here. That represents an inch, and inside this inch I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows. It's 5 by 7, and this is from the website tatao.to/. And you can put in your stitch and row gauge there, and you choose to be life size, and it prints out this is life size. So these squares are 1 inch. If you measure with a ruler, they're 1 inch wide, 1 inch by 1 inch. So this is a life-size picture of my knitting with a stitch gauge of 5 stitches to the inch and 7 rows. Now, obviously that is not the stitch gauge I'm getting for this, but I use this as a teaching sample. If I put in my stitch gauge for this, it would look very different than this looks. So what I did was I took like this part right here. This is going down 1 inch, down 1 inch. And then I have where I'm widening out for my bust, and then my armscye. So I just put that on here with the pencil. I drew it on, you could see the straight line with the pencil. And then I came back, and with my red, I put in where I'm going to knit. So on the very bottom of the armscye, we know these are going to be bound off stitches, right? And when you bind off, if you were doing, this would be your right armscye. And this is another thing. You call it right. This would be the right as I'm wearing it, not as I'm looking at it. So this is the right armscye, right front armscye, even though it looks like it's to the left. So when I'm working this row, I would knit over this way on this row, and then here I would bind these stitches off, and we have to bind off towards the fabric, right? Like you wouldn't work over to here and then bind off. What would happen if you worked over to here and then bound off? Your yarn would end up over here, and you need it over here. You would have to break it and start back over here. So when you're binding off a series of stitches in a garment, you work to the end of the row, and then you bind off. Now, since this would be binding off on the wrong side row, right? So what would I do? I would bind off purlwise, wouldn't I? So that it would be knits on the right side of the fabric. So, and nobody tells you that. You just need to know it. So you're binding off in pattern. So binding off in pattern means I'd bind off purlwise, and then I would work across the wrong side row, come back, and so on and so forth. So these represent decreases. When you have a line like this, that represents bind-offs. If you're going to bind off more than one stitch, you could also do this. Let's say that you have a stair step like this, and you have, looks like you're going to bind off 2. You could do 2 decreases back to back. Or you could bind off 2 stitches. So you would be binding off here, or do your 2 decreases. Either way, if you bind off stair step, the edge of the fabric is going to look like this. If you do 2 decreases, the edge of the fabric is going to look like this. It'll be smooth. It won't have a stair step on it. And when we get up to these parts of the underarm and the neck, I'll show you more swatches on that and what they look like. Any questions on any of this stuff? Yes, we'll put the, down below, once this video is finished, once the live stream is finished, then it gets stored on YouTube as a recorded video. And Diana Danko is the one who takes her time and goes through and creates the timestamps, and they are put in the description of the video down below. So she'll make a note of that. that we want to put the link to the knitter's graph paper, it'll be down in the description below the video, okay? And it's also in the document. I put it in the knit-along document. Okay, and question. So when you plan on the graph paper when to bind off, you need to consider the yarn movement. Exactly. Yep. Yes. Barbara Murphy, can you repeat the name of the site? It's called Ready? TATA dash TATAO dot TO /. Let's see. Vera's name on the Ravelry, her designer name is Vera Sannon, and her Ravelry name is Sun Fun Living or something like that. But Vera Sannon is her designing name. Oh, the Ravelry questions. Thank you. I don't know why. I must have a mental block against that. I did look at them. Okay, so let's see. Community, forums, questions. Okay, good. This is from Sidra G. Hello, Sidra. Suzanne, will you be including instructions on how to do your pocket? Yes, I will be. And I've got to really just take the time to write it out as a top-down, bottom-up, standalone pattern people can purchase and make it for all different sizes. I need to work on that. This is Emmy Roylance. I hope this is where I ask questions. I'm not computer literate. This is going to be a long post, and also thank you, Suzanne, for the week off. I've needed it. I'm very happy with my first sloper. It's a little long in the shoulder, needs waist shaping, and bigger in the arms, but for a sweater, I'm happy with the fit. Not a waste of time. I'm ahead for next project. But, question 1, just followed along with a 2-inch ease because that sounded okay. But when I made my sloper, I find that 2 inches is great for a sweater, but not an outer garment meant to wear over clothes. Is there a rule of thumb for ease of a cardigan? Yes, there's no rule of thumb. It's just your personal preference. And this is where, remember we talked about trying on different sweaters. So and it depends on the weight of the yarn that you're using. Also, if you're using a heavier weight yarn, you're going to need a little bit more ease because the yarn itself takes up a lot of space. So it is personal preference. It is personal preference. Just need to try different sweaters on. And you did try the 2-inch of these, and you feel that you need more, you might try 3 or 4 inches. I wouldn't go up too much though, because it can get quite a bit different fast. Question 2, when I got my sloper done, besides it fitting like a sweater, I found that my lower arm, about 2 inches below my elbow, is quite large, with 2 inches of ease, biceps, and she gives her measurements. Well, that's why you make a sloper. And you learn which areas fit and which don't fit. So you know now from your sloper that you need to take in the lower arm a little bit. That's your personal preference. You like it that way. Dimitri says she's combining a couple of lace stitch patterns and stockinette. How do I choose the size of my knitting graph paper? That's a tough question, and you might need to actually make different sheets of graph paper. And this leads into stitch equivalency and row equivalency. So if, let's say, you have one part of your stitch pattern is having 5 stitches to the inch, and another part on top of it or below it has 7 stitches to the inch, you need to do some stitch equivalency. And you can either compensate by changing needle size or changing your stitch count. If the 2 pieces are side by side and they have different stitch gauge, then you need to just account for that in the overall circumference of your garment. So if one is having 5 stitches to the inch and then next to it another stitch pattern is having 7 stitches to the inch, you just need to know that 7 stitches are equal to 5 and you need to add those stitches in. We can talk more about that. That's a great topic. I like that topic. This is Loops Wool. I was happy that you showed more than one way to do bust darts for bottom-up designs, Because I'm very short, I'd like to work out a way of knitting the body of a sweater from side to side, or perhaps from the center out. This is, once we get the schematic done and your sloper done, you can knit your sweater in any way that you want. You can knit it from the corner to a corner, as long as you know your stitch and row gauge and how it's going to fit in. I'll write this down. I'll add some more information to this next time in the next part of the tutorial. And please remind me if I don't. This is from Francie. I have a question about the schematic for sleeve cap. I understand how you get the measurements, but how does the schematic translate to a 3D piece of knitting? The height of the curve from the baseline representing the upper arm to the crest of the curve representing the point of the shoulder, the acromion, is a cross section through the arms. How do you accommodate for the, say, bulk of the deltoid fleshy bits from which are at 90 degrees to the armhole circumference? Am I getting too specific? Does it work out in the wash since it's knitting, not sewing? Yes, you're getting too specific. It is knitting and it stretches a lot. But also just the shape of the sleeve cap and that curve does accommodate for part of the deltoid. And that is taken into account when you use that upper arm measurement. The measured around your arm, right at your armpit. And that measures really around the junction between your bicep and your deltoid, where they overlap a little bit. And it should give you accurate information. But most people that have big deltoids, their biceps are equally big. It's really hard to isolate and get one muscle really big without getting another muscle that's adjacent to it equally big. So if your deltoids are big, probably your biceps are also big. And so using the bicep measurement at the underarm is going to give you adequate information. It's going to work. It'll work. And it is knitting. Wire knitter. If you have horizontal stripes in the pattern you are knitting, either textures or colors or whatever, where is the match point between the sleeve and the body so your stripes are continuous across the sweater? When I sew, I always match the stripe pattern at the underarm, both the front and back and the sleeves, because the stripes can't be matched in the sleeve cap with the shaping. Is it the same for knitting? Yes, and that's where I talked about earlier that I actually work by counting my rows. I count my rows up the side seams. I would also count my rows in the sleeve cap shaping, and that way the front and back match exactly. This is Kathy RV. Question. In an earlier session, you stated that if you're using the older edition of Ann Budd's book, we need to consider differences in today's styles. Please explain what the differences are and how do we account for that in our new design. I will do that in just a second. I'm going to answer the last question, and then I'll show you in those books. This is Tadilli. Hi, everyone. I have a question. Not sure if this is the right place to post it. I'm not very good with Ravelry. Has Suzanne mentioned which book is a good reference for pattern grading? I know in one of her videos she was going to come back with a reference book, but I might have missed it. I don't have a good book for grading. Does somebody have a good book for grading? You know, that's grading is a mystery to me. I know how to do it, and I hate doing it because I do it individually, pattern by pattern. But does somebody have a good reference? Demetrius, anybody have a good reference on grading? Okay, so let me show you in Ann Budd's books. Okay, here's her two books right here. This is the first one. This is the second one. The first one is published in, let me go to show my hand so you can see this with me. Okay, this one was published in 2004. This one was published in 2012. So let's just go to the set-in sleeve right here, the schematic. This is for children. Let's find the adult. I'm having some work done in my house. You could probably hear it. Okay, let's use this one up here. Let's use the 22-inch size. It's the larger size. Make this big. And let's find the same thing in this book. Set in sleeves, the schematics. Okay, here's the schematics for this book. Let's see if we can, I don't know if I can get them both on here together. Almost. I think I can. You'll have to believe me when I read the numbers. So this one says adult size is 36 to 44 inches. That's the finished garment. Down here, this one says adult size is 36 to 44 right here. So on this one, the like for size 22, the armscye is 10 inches deep. On this one, for size 22, the armscye is 7.5 inches deep. On this one, the top of the shoulder is 18.5. On this one, the circumference of the top of the shoulder is 13.5. Do you see the difference? Same size. Whoops, this is child. I want to look at this one. No wonder I'm off. Let's change it. So this is 10 inches. On the adult, it's 8.5 down here. 8.5 for the same size. The upper arm is 18.5. On here, the upper arm is 17.5. And everything is different on all the sweaters in both these books. Everything in this sweater, the armhole depth and the upper arm are different than everything in this book. In this book, the armhole depth is a lot deeper. The upper arm is a lot wider. Everything is just bigger in the upper part of the sweater. The width and the length are the same, but the armscye for raglan, yoke, all the different styles, the armhole depth is much deeper in this book that was made in 2004 versus this book that I say is 2012. It's just a matter of when the fashions of the time. Does that answer that question? Okay. And Can says, comment, the planning on knitter's graph paper is like knitting the sweater. Exactly. So that's huge, because when we're done doing planning our waist shaping, the armscye, the neck, whether you're going to put pockets in, you're going to have it all on your schematic. And then guess what you do? You knit to your schematic. You just knit to the schematic. That's all you have to do. So the other lady that was asking whether she can knit top down, side to side, bottom up, the schematic's the same. You can knit it top down, bottom up, side to side. You can knit it from corner to corner, as long as you know your stitch and your row gauge. It makes knitting, it's so cool, because once you learn this technique that I'm teaching you, and this is the 4th series because I'm teaching the same thing, just different sweater styles, you can look at a sweater in a magazine or a picture or at a store or that someone's wearing, and you can draw it on a piece of paper and you can knit it. You don't need to have row by row directions. You can just knit it. Oh, this is a good question. This say, okay, so the grading pattern, Jack Hanford's Professional Pattern Grading is a good example. There you go. I missed some questions. This is 37 Vega Lira. For the ITAG cardigan, which stitch did you use for the waist shaping? Is it the same stitch on both the right and left of the cardigan? I used the blended decreases and increases. So if we go back to our hands, let me find my little swatches. So in this swatch here, this is the blended, right? And this would be, if this is the front of your cardigan, so this is the midline right here, and this is to the left of the midline on your body as you're wearing it. This would be the left waist over here. These are blended decreases. They lean towards the waist. If you were going to make on the right side over here, they would be SSKs. They would be mirror of this. So over here, you would work to the marker, and then you would do an SSK. So they would be mirror images. If you were doing this one, this would be the left waist here. This is the midline, either the front or the back. Here you're doing, these are the full fashion, these are SSKs. Over here on this side, you would be mirroring them, they would be knit two togethers. Okay? Let's see. And same thing when I go up above the waist and I'm going to do increases, I mirror the increases as well. So let's see here what's next. Let me go down the list here. Gillian. Okay, this is it. Your red line sometimes is on the pencil line and sometimes it's not. That's right, because the red line indicates the stitches that are going to be knit. You can only knit whole stitches. So this line is going right through the middle of this stitch right here. I have to decide, am I going to knit that stitch or not knit that stitch? I decided to not knit that stitch, so I'm knitting this stitch right here. And it's totally arbitrary. You can choose like this one. I could have made my red line go up here like this, but I want to make the decreases on the right side rows. If I moved it up to here, I'd have to make this decrease on the wrong side row. So I planned it that all my decreases are on right side rows. You can't make decreases on wrong side rows. That's okay. It's up to you. Okay, there was a question of Veronica. Please see my question at 446 and 447. I'm sorry, but I can't see times on here. Nick said he accidentally deleted your question. So, Veronica, can you restate your question? Anybody else have any other questions? We're going to call it to a close here shortly. So the next section of the knit along, I've already got a lot of it done. It's about the increases and the decreases, the shaping. It will also have the pocket, telling you about a variety of pockets. Did I ever show you Jackie's sweater? Did I show you Jackie's sweater that we put the afterthought pocket in? I don't remember. Let me go get it. This is from the ITAG drop shoulder. This is actually the class I taught in Bakersfield several years ago when I first did this class. So she has this Aran sweater that she designed and knit doing the ITAG. It's just gorgeous. It's just beautiful. Really, really pretty. There's the back. Just gorgeous with big shawl collar. And she decided at that time she didn't want to put pockets in it. We could put pockets in it, but she decided she didn't want to put pockets in it. But after wearing it, she decided she needs pockets. So let me put it on and show you. So here's the sweater. And she decided that she wanted pockets in it. She would like, she just felt like she needed to put pockets in it. So what we did is I had her open the seam down here. She's opened the seam, took the seam out. And I'll take it off and show you. And we haven't done this pocket yet. I'm going to record it when I do this pocket. I'm using it as a sample to show how to put an afterthought pocket in. And this afterthought pocket is not visible on the front of the work. Here's the front of the work. That's the front of the sweater. So I'll go to my hands here. So here's her pocket. Right here. Here's the seam that we took out. Right here. There's the front of the sweater. I had her open the seam here. So this is the ribbing. So she opened the seam from here to here. Then on the and you see you can't see anything going on here, can you? Looks perfect. So on the inside, I had her pick up stitches from the top of the ribbing invisibly. Picked up stitches here. And then I had her pick up the left leg of the selvage stitch here and the left leg of the ribbing over the top, the stitch between the cables here. So then she knit across here and did an SSK with the stitch from the edge, purled and did a knit two together with the stitch and all the way up the edge. Now she's going to Kitchener this to the top, and it's totally invisible. So this edge here is seamed to the back of the sweater. This is the back of the sweater. So when you look at the front, there's the lining that she just made right here, and it's seamed to the back of the sweater. And here is the front of the pocket. And we're going to put just a tidy little edging on, nothing fancy, probably just maybe even a slip stitch crochet all the way down here to make it real tidy. And that is her afterthought pocket, totally invisible. So the instructions for doing this will be in this tutorial, as well as other pockets. You can do the same thing on the front of the garment. You can put an afterthought pocket on the front of the garment as well, which you can see like a patch pocket. That you would call a patch pocket. I call this an afterthought pocket. Let's see if Veronica put her question. So Sue, let's see, on Gillian, she said on here that this straddles the line. You just have to decide where you're going to put them. You know, there's no rule about this. You just make arbitrary decisions. And remember, knitting is very, very flexible. A stitch or two isn't going to make any difference. Sue McVicker. Sorry, I cannot edit to get that link out. Meant to copy title. Concepts of pattern grading. Techniques for manual and computer grading. 3rd edition by Kathy K. Mullet. This is the one I was thinking. Thank you. I want to write that down. It's called Concepts of Pattern Grading. That's good to know. If anybody wants to write books on grading, it would be a popular topic. Veronica Stevens, I would like to knit a pullover for a self-conscious big belly guy. You showed one with rib from elbow across to shoulder. Would that look good? How can I get that pattern? With rib from elbow across to shoulder. Which one was that? What color was it, Veronica? Question, this is from Deborah. When you want to include pockets, does it become important to work at a firmer gauge to lessen any sagging? Only at the pocket edge. Only at the pocket edge. That's a good question, Deborah. Okay, and question, what is pattern grading? Is it design the pattern for different? Yes, it's sizing. Sizing and grading are the same thing. So once you have it takes, for me, it takes all the fun out of designing something because, for example, let's see, I'll go to that in just a second. Okay, so let me go back to my hands. I'm going to turn this paper over. Okay, so let's say that you created this real cute design, okay? And you really like it. Here's your sweater. And you've got this all over kind of stitch pattern that looks really kind of cool. And it works out perfectly for this sweater, this stitch design. And let's say you need to grade it. So you need to make the neck size a little bit bigger, right? Next one's a little bit bigger. And guess what? The stitch count doesn't work. It won't work out. You can't do it. It doesn't work. So this is why you see lots of sweaters like this that have a stitch pattern in this area. And then some sort of edging stitch over here, like seed stitch or moss stitch or something like that. That's because it's real easy to adjust the sizes on this. All you have to do is add more edging stitches. It doesn't take any great amount of thought. This, you have to figure out for every single size how you're going to end it at the edge, because it might not be. Let's say you have a stitch pattern like this, a lace stitch pattern. Something like this, it has a certain count to it, and one of the sweaters is going to end like right here. Another one's going to end over here. So each direction that you write has to be different because the lace pattern fits in different at the edge. So you have to write different directions for every single size about the shaping. It is not fun. It's not fun. For some people that might be. For me, it takes the joy out of knitting. Other people really may enjoy doing that. Well, Veronica said it was a picture a few weeks ago from someone on Ravelry. I'm sorry, but I don't remember that. I don't remember it. I'm sorry, Veronica. Maybe you could go back to that video and look for it. It should have a name. If you can see the picture of it on Ravelry, you should be able to see the name. Any other questions? Any other comments? It's 2:17. We've filled up the allotted time. I thought I wasn't going to have enough to talk about today, but there's always plenty to talk about. So we'll be back here next week, same time, same place. Give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Oh, day before yesterday, I hit 90,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel. That's just flabbergasting. But I'd really like to have 100,000. That's my goal for this summer sometime. I want to surpass 100,000. So if you know anybody that would like to subscribe to my YouTube channel, send them my way, okay? Okay, so I'm going to let you go. We'll see you next time. Have a good week. Happy knitting. Bye-bye.